Welcome to our series of videos around the social innovation sprint model. Today we will be focusing on the understand phase. The understand phase is the first phase in our social innovation sprint model. This is the phase where we try to understand the problem and the context. So what does that mean? At this point in time, we are trying to figure out what is the problem we are trying to solve. And we do that by really trying to understand the problem and doing some research to look at the context, look at who else has influence into this challenge. Who are the stakeholders? Who are currently involved? How is the current problem unfolding? How people are experiencing it? And how is this problem being solved or being tried to be solved today? But first, let's look at how we can scope our challenge. And although, for the sake of this training of facilitators, you don't need to scope a challenge because we already chose a challenge that you will be working on. Once you start working with your constituents, the people that you are going to run these sprints with, they will require a challenge to be given to them, and you will need to scope those challenges, whether it's around youth unemployment or how to improve their neighborhood. You will need to scope the challenge that people will be working on through the social innovation sprint. So I think it's important for us to understand a bit more about how to scope the challenge. And it's important to know that every project starts with a challenge. And a good design challenge really doesn't give many answers, but it helps us to start thinking about and it brings more questions to the table. And in reality, a good challenge can make people feel uncomfortable because the way challenges are framed, they don't come with any built-in solution. It's just a question that can accommodate a number of possible solutions. So in a way, it just draws the limitations and intentions of the project. And a well-defined challenge will guide your team in moments where you need to make tough calls and decisions, and it will help you follow objectively throughout this human-centered design process. One aspect that is really important around framing challenges is to find the right balance so that the challenge is not too narrow, neither is too broad. And really, when we are framing a challenge, we want to define an opportunity for design. And if you ask your team to solve a problem that is too broad, they will feel overwhelmed. They won't know where to start. But if you give them a problem that is too narrow, then you might risk uh, cutting all the possible creativity. So it's really important as you are scoping a new challenge to frame the design question with some factors in mind. And these are the three factors that you should keep in mind. Factor A, is the question focused on ultimate impact? By reading the challenge question, do you understand what we are trying to achieve? B, does the question allow for a variety of solutions? So is this a question that can accommodate different types of products or services, or is the solution already embedded? And C, does the question take into account context and constraints? Does it add any information about who we are designing for or for which geographical location? So these are three important aspects to have in mind. And let's look at some examples. So here are some examples from IDEO, and I mentioned the source on the lower right corner where you can actually go and see more examples that are available in this Acumen course. But for the sake of this video today, Here are three examples. So the first one, how might we help teens in Lusaka take control of their reproductive health? So this was about a sexual health nonprofit which had clinics all over the world, and they engaged with IDEO to run an initial 14-week project. And this is how they framed the design question. How might we help teens in Lusaka take control of their reproductive health? So they could have chosen different framings. For example, they could have said, how might we end unwanted pregnancy? But that would be too broad. That's a big question. It's massive, and it allows for a huge variety of solutions. So we wouldn't even know where to start from. Should we start with parents, with teens, with teachers? Well, it's too broad. Another way to frame it would be, how might we get Zambian teens to use condoms? But that would be too narrow because the solution is already embedded. The solution would be condoms. So we could not consider any solution that would include pills or abstinence or some other solution. So that's too narrow because it will restrict our creativity. But by asking the question as, how might we help teens in Lusaka take control of their reproductive health, this is just the right fit. It's not too broad, it's not too narrow. Another way to look at it is asking ourselves these three questions to make sure it satisfies our criteria. And the first question, as I mentioned, is the question focused on ultimate impact? Yes, absolutely. By reading the question, we understand that the goal is to help teens take control of their reproductive health. So it's very clear the goal of the project, the ultimate impact we are trying to achieve. Moving to B, does the question allow for a variety of solutions? Well, yes. There are so many possible solutions for this question. It could be a communication campaign, a service experience, a physical space, a mobile tool. There are a number of possible solutions. So definitely it hits the second criteria. And the third one, does the question take into account context and constraints? Yes, absolutely. Just by reading the question, we already know that this is a challenge that we are trying to solve in Lusaka, and our focus will be to design solutions that can help teenagers. So it's very clear also who we are designing for. Another example would be this example around planting teff in Ethiopia. So teff, for those who don't know, it's a very important grain in Ethiopia, but its seeds are very, very tiny, and it's been planted in the same way for thousands of years. So in this project, IDEO was engaged to figure out how to plant teff more efficiently and quickly, taking into account different soil types and terrains. So this is how they decided to frame the design question or the challenge. How might we design a better way to plant teff in Ethiopia? But let's look at some other examples, some other ways in which this question could have been framed. It could have been framed as, how might we help Ethiopians grow more food? But again, this would be too big of a question. It would bring us to so many different possibilities, we wouldn't even know where to start from. Or it could be too narrow. How might we design a plastic, solar-powered teff planter for under $15? So this doesn't leave much room for creativity. All the characteristics of the solution are already embedded in it. It's like you already have an idea how you are going to solve it. You are going to do it through a plastic, solar-powered teff planter for under $15. So there's not much room for innovation. It's too narrow. But by framing it as, how might we design a better way to plant teff in Ethiopia? That might be just the right fit. And again, we can look at the three criteria. Is this question focused on ultimate impact? Yes, we want to design a better way to plant teff. Does it allow for a variety of solutions? Yes, we can consider planting devices, we can consider behavior change campaign. There are a number of different possibilities to enable us to design a better way to plant teff. And does the question take into account the context and constraints? Yes, it does. Because knowing that we had to design for the whole of Ethiopia meant that we would need to contend with hard earth as well as mud. But knowing that we are designing around small seed size, that gives us some constraints of how we are approaching this project. So there is a third example. I'm not going to go through it in much detail. You can pause the video and just go through it yourself. But this is one example around encouraging good financial habits for youth. So this might be also interesting for you to explore and try to understand the different ways in which this could have been framed. Very well. Moving forward, there's another question that is important for us to ask when we are framing these design challenges, which is, are these human subjective challenges? Not all possible challenges are appropriate to be solved through human-centered design. For example, if you are trying to optimize a turbine, well, you shouldn't use human-centered design. This is an engineering problem. You should work with engineers and follow some other process, not a human-centered design process. Let's say you want to create a better vaccination process. Well, yes, then you could use human-centered design because you will be working with patients, with doctors, with pharmacists. They all might have different perspectives about how a better vaccination process could be designed. These are all human elements in the system, and therefore they are subjective and prone to benefit from this process. Imagine you want to develop a higher efficacy vaccination or a better vaccine. Well, if you want to develop a better vaccine, you need to work with the scientists who have the scientific knowledge on how to develop vaccines. But in looking at it from a different point of view, if your goal is to ensure that people actually accept to take that vaccine, or the effectiveness of the vaccine can be determined by a number of human factors, so then design might have a role to play there. Imagine you want to make a supply chain more efficient. Well, maybe. Are there benefits to be gained by understanding the people involved in the design change in their behavior? If yes, then this could be a good design challenge. So these are some examples that helps you to make a decision whether, based on the challenge at hand, is human-centered design the right approach for it? And in order to help you make those decisions, we can look at these criteria. So there is this checklist that you can use whenever you want to make sure that you are framing the challenge in a proper way and that you are using human-centered design in a challenge that could benefit from this methodology. The first criteria is the challenge is a human subjective challenge, which means that understanding people is key to the project success. Also, human-centered design challenges are usually geared toward discovery, not optimization. When you want to explore and discover, then human-centered design adds much more than when compared to you just want to improve a little aspect of a solution. The challenge can be solved with a variety of solutions, such as products, services, events, campaigns, or spaces. So it's really important that the framing doesn't assume a solution already. If you already have a solution in mind, well, then go ahead and just implement it. This process benefits more when you have an open mind to explore other possibilities. And the other point in this checklist is framing doesn't presume the user needs. We tend to make a lot of assumptions about what our user needs, and human-centered design really allows us to have a beginner mindset and trying to learn from the users themselves and let this journey of learning unfold needs that you might not have identified yet. So try not to make too many assumptions. And if that's the case, if that's the mindset, then absolutely human-centered design might be the right process. Also, make sure that the goal of the project is clear, but without dictating the specific solution outcome. We want to understand what is the intention. We want to have that clear, but we don't need to specify the solution on the outset of the project. And also make sure that you and your team actually care about this challenge. Otherwise, why would you spend time trying to find solutions for it? So make sure that you are motivated to spend some time digging into a problem, exploring possible opportunities and solutions. And it's really important when we are in the very beginning of our design process that we spend some time before jumping into solutions, we spend some time understanding the underlying problem because that's key to solve it. And this picture of the iceberg, it's a great analogy. Sometimes we just see the tip of the iceberg. We think that the problem is just that little tip. But in reality, there is 90% of things that are uncovered that we don't even see. And we need to make sure if we want to innovate and come up with new impactful solutions, we need to make sure that we understand the whole problem, that we see below the surface. We see what is not revealed at the moment. So the question we should ask ourselves is, what steps can we take to ensure that we understand the context and complexities of a development challenge? And this is what the rest of this lecture will be about. How can we understand the the context and the complexities that can help us to build a better understanding of it? So the first question I want to bring here is how to explore the problem space. Usually we work under very large problems like unemployment, climate change. These are huge problem spaces. But in order for us to, and building on the some concepts that I exposed to you earlier of not having challenges that are neither too narrow, neither too broad, we need to first look at the problem space and then identify a part of that problem that could be the right fit for our social innovation sprint. One way to do that is through a mind map. So, a mind map is a diagram that helps you manage information, understand which topics are related, and explore themes that are around that problem space. It stimulates unconventional thinking and it helps us to identify unexplored territory for new ideas. So this is one example of what a mind map could look like. It usually starts with something at the center, and from there we start to build on a number of ideas, solutions, causes, information, themes that relate to each other. So in this one, we are trying to explore the theme of health. And we start by thinking, what are some of the things that come across our mind when we think about health? Well, one thing is stress. So, stress for me is linked to health, but also exercise is, and diet and sleep. And when I think about diet, maybe there are a number of things that I should be considering. I should be considering eating more fruits and vegetables. When I think about vegetables, it's also linked to vitamins, different types of vitamins that influence our health. And breads and cereals, this is something that eating whole grains is also something that I learned that can contribute to your health. And moving into sleep, well, when I think about sleep, one of the things that comes to mind is that we sleep actually a lot. 33% of our life we spend sleeping. But many of us suffer from insomnia. And I recently read an article about insomnia. So there are some tips that I remember about what could help with insomnia. One is to have a comfy mattress, do some exercise, not smoking. So, as you can see, just by having a dialogue between, or either I can do this individually or with the team, to start to think about when I start with health, what are the things that resonates with health? What do I remember every time I think about health? And from there, you start narrowing it down to smaller themes. And this is how you build a mind map. This is another example of a mind map, and this is around empowering teachers. So here I thought a bit differently. So I was thinking, what are some of the ways in which we can empower teachers? What are some elements that are important? And I thought, well, teachers need support. Um, we can do a number of things to support them. Engagement is really important. Um, Teachers' empowerment also relates to quality, and we can think about it as a global response. So this is another diagram in which I relate a number of information around a specific topic or theme around empowering teachers. As you can see, it's not very well structured, and it can have different ways of us arranging information, and there is no right or wrong way. You just need to make sure that things make sense to yourself. And the reason why we are doing mind maps is to expand our thinking, for us to start to look at other themes that are related, that in the beginning it wasn't that obvious. This is a third example of a mind map. This is around a project in Jordan around informal and formal small businesses. So, in this particular example, the team started to explore why people don't open formal businesses, and they came up with some reasons. Some reasons are the legal barriers, or they don't know the regulations, or they don't have capital, or they don't have Jordanian partners. But why they don't have Jordanian partners? Oh, because they can't find them or they don't want partners. Why do they don't want partners? Well, because of fear of exploitation. So this is another example of how a mind map could interlink information. So this is more like a causal um, analysis of different issues. Here we have another example of people do not generate enough income through informal businesses. But why? Because they cannot connect to demand. And why? Because there is no demand, or maybe they don't have marketing capacity. So this is another way, another example around how a mind map could be built. So this slide of Do It, this is the first one where an activity is being proposed to you. So as a team, you will need to create a mind map to help you understand the challenge that we are going to work on in more depth. So on the right side, you have some instructions. So start with a blank piece of paper, or you can do this either digitally or you can do it in person. You can take a flip chart paper, for example, and do it with your team. And start with the theme, putting the theme, the main theme in the center, and then start to create connections and ramifications related to that central theme and continue to expand from the center as in the examples that I showed you before. And try not to be judgmental and let your thoughts flow freely. As I said before, there's no right or wrong way. And you have 60 minutes for this activity, which should be more than enough. And basically, you should end this exercise when you feel that there are no more ideas, no more thoughts coming to your mind because you already explored all the possible ramifications of the problem at hand. The next topic that I want to cover in this lesson is who should we engage with to gather valuable user insights? So, as we are learning more about the problem and the context, there is value in engaging with people so that we can learn from them. One exercise that can help us to understand who should we engage with is a stakeholder map. So the stakeholder map is a visual exercise of mapping in which you try to plot all the possible stakeholders that relate or have interest in your project outcome. In this example on the screen, this is a stakeholder map for the traffic citation system. So every time you do something wrong while driving, for example, this is all the stakeholders that are involved. You might have to deal with police. You might take a fine, and then you need to deal with lawyers. You might need to deal with vendors. You might get asked to plea in the court. So there are a number of stakeholders that are involved in the traffic citation system. And this allows you to see who they are, which groups, how can you group them in a logical way, and how do they relate to each other. It's very useful to see this visually because you can really understand who is involved with the current problem and how they relate to each other. And then this will be key because once you understand who the stakeholders are, you could then decide who do you want to engage with so that you go to explore what is their experience around the problem and how their learning and experience can help you to find opportunities for design. This is another example of a stakeholder map. So this is a stakeholder map around the Swedish forests. So here you can see that there are kind of five groups of stakeholders. One are the recreational users who use forests, and they use the land of landowners. And the landowners usually are organized in forestry cooperatives, and they ask for help of forestry cooperatives, which at the same time they are linked to the timber buying industry. And they also have to apply for and comply with the policies of authorities, of governments. There are different laws and politics that influence the forestry. And also, there are a number of forest contracts and machine operators who also work with landowners in order to do something with the forest. I'm not a specialist in forest, but what this stakeholder map helps you to understand is who are the different players that have some kind of influence in Swedish forestry and how do they relate with each other. And by having a map like this, if I want to learn more about Swedish forestry, I could already take some decisions that, okay, I'm going to talk to landowners and see how do they manage the forests. And then I could, based on what they tell me about different laws and regulations that help them to grow forest or in a way are preventing them for doing a good job, I could take that information and then go talk to some forest agencies and authorities, and then I would ask them some more questions, which would help me to gain a wider perspective and perspective from different players. which would significantly increase my understanding of the problem. So the next activity you should be doing is to create a stakeholder map. And you want to create a stakeholder map to increase your understanding of who is involved in your challenge. So in order to create the stakeholder map, you as a team should take some time to identify all the possible stakeholders who might be influenced or are involved with the problem you are trying to solve. And then you will start to group these stakeholders into clusters, and you will start to draw some arrows and map some relationships between them. And if you have time, you can also label those relationships and identify the directionality. We have around 60 minutes for this exercise, and that should be more than enough. And as usual, you can do this digitally using any kind of software. You can do it in PowerPoint or in any software you feel familiarized with, or you can just do this on paper using Post-its and at the end take a picture. So this is really the summary. We are getting towards the end of the lesson, and it's just to summarize the work that your team will need to accomplish in the upcoming days. So there are two exercises that you need to accomplish, which should take around 2 hours. One is to create a mind map. A second one is to create a stakeholder map. All the instructions about when you need to submit it and where you should submit these exercises will be provided to you on the email that you have received. Thank you and see you in the next lesson.